Hello and welcome to the People Mentor video interviews. I'm so delighted to have Helen Clare on my video here to interview because I've been in her Facebook group for absolutely ages, and her advice is second to none around the menopause and all the symptoms and how to resolve issues. When I first went in, I was discussing some really intimate things that I was struggling with, and there was nowhere else to go. So it was fantastic that with a free Facebook group that you could just get this support as well. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Helen. And Helen, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I help people get through the menopause, and I do that through the Facebook group, through one-to-one sessions and group sessions with anybody who needs me. But I also run menopause in schools, where I go into schools to support schools and teachers and their other staff, again, to get through perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah, because it's really incredibly difficult at times, isn't it? And I can remember struggling with brain fog. And I did a video recently about feeling like everybody, when I was walking down the street, like everybody was coming towards me. And I thought I'd got something wrong with my brain, to be honest. And then I went to the doctors. They sent me for a brain scan, couldn't find anything. And it's only years later, through being in your group and various other things, that I've actually realised it was a symptom that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
And there's so many symptoms that we don't know about, isn't there?
I think there is, because we have estrogen receptors all over our bodies, and estrogen also makes all our cells metabolize faster, including our brain cells. So those symptoms can happen anywhere, and they can happen in a totally different patterns in different people, and a different pattern to the same person over time as well. Although you do have to also be careful that not everything that happens at this time of life is perimenopausal. So you're also kind of going, is this perimenopause? Is this another thing triggered by perimenopause? Or is this something that needs a completely different kind of approach? So you've got to be really aware of what's going on in your body and mind, and prepared to seek support.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because you could so easily dismiss a symptom thinking it is that, and actually it's something more serious underlying, or something that just needs like I had thyroid problems and I needed that, and the doctor thought I was in the menopause to start with, but it wasn't that, it was my thyroid. So yeah, good point.
And get jumbled.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so can you share why why menopause is an important topic for leaders in large organizations, especially in the context of education?
I think the thing about menopause is that actually it's not special. Everybody has health problems at various times in their careers and their work, affect their work and their home. It doesn't matter what age, what sex, what gender they are. There can be physical problems, mental health problems, emotional problems. We all have them. And we hope that when we have them, we can have a nice, sensitive and practical conversation with the people around us, including our employers, so that we can sort things out. And that helps everybody. That is to the benefit of our employer, of our managers, of our teammates, our colleagues, and people at home, and ourselves. So that benefits everybody. The thing is, menopause has got missed out of that for all sorts of reasons, because we've grown up kind of not talking about it. Because there's all sorts of shame attached to it, and embarrassment, and some of it, frankly, is a bit messy. And also, until quite recently, there hasn't been the level of information available that people have needed to realise what was happening and what to do about it. So it's more about correcting this historical problem, so that actually anybody, when they have a health problem, we can sort it out.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because we discussed everything else, and there really are some taboo subjects even still now. Yeah. When I worked in the corporate, which I left 2 years ago now, I have to think about that one. But we had a wellness group, and there were some subjects that really, when they tried to bring them in to discuss into team meetings, it just went flat as a pancake, and people were like, no, we don't want to hear that here. And yet they were the very subjects that were probably quite painful to people and who wanted to support with. So it's a good point. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So what are the common challenges that teachers going through menopause or perimenopause face in their workplace?
So the thing that you talk to me about the most is brain fog. It's a job where you think a lot on your feet, and you talk a lot and you think a lot and you react to things a lot, and that thing that happens when you just, and the words just, they're gone. You have no idea what was supposed to come out of there. And that's to do with the effect of changing estrogen levels on a particular area of the brain. And that can be quite devastating because it can really hit at a teacher's confidence, and make them feel judged by other people and laughed at by other people, and it can be frustrating for other people. And of course, they worry about what the kids think and what their colleagues think. So that's one of the problems, is that brain fog and that memory loss. And then there's the mood swings, because obviously one of the challenges of teaching is that you keep calm, even when you're dealing with children and young people who are not great at emotional regulation.
Yeah.
Politely. And so when your own emotional regulation has gone squiffy because bits of your brain are playing silly games, then that makes that so much harder. So I would say that and mood swings. And then the other things are the things about getting to the loo, because teachers just don't get to go to the loo when they fancy. Sometimes it can be a very long time before they get to go to the loo. And if you've got problem perimenopausal bleeding or menopausal bladder issues or any of those things, then you need to be able to get to the toilet. So that throws up an immediate problem that needs to be fixed.
Absolutely. And again, in my recent video, I talked about having perimenopause or heavy bleeding and being so embarrassed in the workplace. And I think it's far more common than is actually shared. And I think there's a lot of women who are feeling really, really like they're struggling with this issue, and that they're so embarrassed by it also they can't talk about it.
Yeah. And you've also got young women who do have menstrual problems, particularly if there's endometriosis or dealing with, fertility issues and all those sorts of things. They all also show up about in tricky bleeding. And sometimes it really is quite dramatic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Very sudden, especially if your periods have become irregular because of perimenopause. It's very sudden and it can be very, very heavy.
Yeah.
And you can get caught out. Absolutely
get caught out. And you could have just gone like the hour before to the toilet, sit down. You just don't know when it's going to happen.
No, I've had teachers say, I'm standing there and in front of my class and I can swear I can feel this trickling down my legs.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel for them, because they have the set lessons, they have to stay there, they can't just go off to the toilets when they want to. That must be incredibly difficult.
It is, and it is enough to keep teachers off work, because why would you put yourself through that? Not to mention the fact that often that's coming with a side order of fairly brutal menstrual cramps as well.
Yeah.
Take your mind off your job, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really good points, because I don't think we tend to think like that about those issues that people might be going through, and we're just there and we're just thinking about how work is running, and we don't think about the person themselves a lot of the time.
Yeah. So, and if you've got somebody who's off a lot and you're not quite sure why, or you just don't feel that they're 100% there, or you can, people leave their work because of this. And when people disappear from the workforce because of problems like this, there is kind of a point of no return. We put up with this, and if it gets fixed early, we can kind of get back on track and get back to kind of loving our job again and getting satisfaction of doing it. But if it goes too far and our workplace has just become a bit of a nightmare to us, sometimes people can't get that back. They can't get back on track. They're sort of down the slippery slope. So the earlier you can offer those people support, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read, and I can't recall what the statistic was now, but it's really quite high, of women actually leaving work at that point. And we need them, and they've got a lot to give, haven't they? So
they're the people that do, they're the people that offer support to young staff. They're the people that do they're the people often that do the bits and pieces that just keep everything running, that nobody notices until you stop doing it. And of course, these days, a lot of women in their sort of mid-40s, early 50s are running schools.
Yeah. Yeah. So they need the support, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's brilliant. Thank you for explaining that. So how can the leaders, the senior leaders at the top, create a culture within their organisation or the head teachers that encourages that open and confident discussion about menopause?
I think they have to lead by example. I think they have to be open to talking about it. I think having information available to people is really, really important. I think you've got to be really careful, because what you can't do is push those conversations on people. And you certainly, you know, we've probably all experienced this when we've got like a friend and we kind of go, oh yeah, that's menopause. And we can have that kind of, to be honest, that conversation's tricky enough when it's your mate.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible when it's your colleague.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is make that information available.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways of making that information available, and also one of the ways of signaling your intention, is through your menopause policy, which may exist as a standalone thing or as part of your wellbeing policy. But there's no point having a policy that sits on a hard drive somewhere that nobody knows about. So you do have to be prepared to stand up and say, we have got this menopause policy, and the reason we've got this menopause policy is, and anybody who wants to talk about it can talk about it to me. And there's still going to be barriers, but that's where you start.
Yeah.
One of the things I do is go into schools and talk about it, and that generally like pops the bubble a little bit.
Yeah, it's like that elephant in the room, isn't it? And then you get somebody in who's talking about it, and that kind of starts that conversation, doesn't it?
It's normalizing it. It's treating it as something normal. That's very important.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point about the menopause policy, because most places have them now, but I think they're rarely talked about.
Oh, places have them that don't know they've got them.
Yeah, and so they need to be talked about. They need to be regularly shared. They need to be regularly reviewed. Do they need an update?
Yeah, and which is a great way of keeping talking about them. It's like, we've reviewed our menopause policy, even if you've only put a semicolon in.
Yeah.
We've reviewed our menopause policy. Do check it out.
Yeah.
Just keeping it up there.
Yeah, and have you got any questions?
Yeah.
Is there anything, if they involve the employees and say, is there anything you want us to add to this, then that starts the discussion.
Very often there will be a group of staff who are quite willing to contribute to the menopause policy.
Yeah.
And then because they want that policy to reflect their needs.
Yeah.
But if you couldn't, the more people you can involve in the writing of it, the better.
Exactly. And it opens up the awareness to other people as well. So yeah, so that's a really good point. And I still think there is the odd place that hasn't got a menopause policy. So if they haven't got one, they need to be thinking about it, don't they?
It's a tool for education, because there's information about the menopause there. It makes it clear who has responsibility for what and what's expected of people. It makes it clear what accommodations a school can offer, and they're expected legally to offer reasonable accommodations, but it enables them to go through a process of deciding what is reasonable for them and what isn't. So in actual fact, what it can do is benefit the employer by putting limitations on that, because there are some things in some environments that are non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Flexible working, for example, it is possible in some schools, but you probably, if you've got an employer that says, can I come in at 10 o'clock every morning? There are work environments in which that's possible, and that's going to be, sometimes it's possible, but it's going to be much more challenging in a school environment.
Yeah.
So if you know that your school really can't do that, and especially in small schools it's tricky, then you can make that clear in your menopause policy, but you can also make clear what you can do and what is available. So there's a legal protection in it as well.
Yeah, and so you're kind of setting the boundaries, the expectations, so everybody's really clear where they stand.
Yeah, and this simple thing of, who do I talk to?
Yeah. Yeah, because quite often we don't know who to go to.
Things, just to simply know who you talk to, and what you should expect from that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So some really good advice there, Helen. Thank you, for any organisation listening in to go and implement. So how can leaders help teachers in perimenopausal or menopausal find effective coping strategies to manage their symptoms and maintain their job performance? Because as you've touched on, there are some real issues, especially in schools, where they can't just leave and go and sort themselves out. They've got to stay in the classroom. So how do you give them those coping mechanisms so that they can get through?
One of the things that some of the schools I've worked with do is, particularly secondary schools, tend to have a system where, because it's not like my day, they all have computers in their classroom now, they can email for support with behaviour. And so what some schools do is extend that system so that there is a monitored email inbox for people who need to be relieved in their classroom. Relieved, literally.
Yeah.
You need just somebody to come along down the corridor and say, this is such and such a body. This is just something you need to take care of in the office. Shall I stand with your class for 5 minutes?
Oh, I like that approach. Yeah.
So there are things you can do. If you've got a secondary school where you've got senior leaders who walk the corridors, which is quite often good practice anyway, because they get to know what's going on and their presence sets a certain tone, then you can use that as well. Knowing when these problems are likely to turn up is actually really important. So if you look at your timetable and you know your body, you may find that kind of go, okay, Monday mornings, I've got a registration and then I spend time with my form, and then I've got a lesson, and it's a double lesson with bumps and burners, and then I'm on duty, and then I've got 8:30 to 1, I'm stuck in there. So that's going to be a problem. So you can see ahead of time where the problems might occur, and then you're in a position to alert somebody and say, actually, this is a problem. Can I do my duty on Thursday instead of, on a different day? Or can we have a way of just giving me a break somewhere in that morning? So if you kind of preempt problems, and that's not to say problems won't show up unexpectedly, but at least you reduce some of them because you've spotted the ones that might happen.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because the responsibility is two-way, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is the responsibility of the person who is struggling with perimenopause and menopause to be very clear what the problems are and where they're showing up, so that you can have a conversation that's not just kind of like, oh my God, and there will be a bit of oh my God at the beginning of that conversation, but it needs to move on to, what can we do to help? What can we do to actually make this better and help you cope and help you do your job?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So again, sound advice. Thank you for that. Really helpful. Have you got any examples, or can you share some examples of successful menopause policies and strategies that schools have implemented to support their employees?
Yeah, I mean, I've helped schools create a number of menopause policies, and the most important thing that happens from the whole process is that people start talking about it. That's almost always, and very often people say, oh, we've decided to set up our own support group, or we've decided, a group of us, we're going to write out the menopause policy. I went to one school, and there was a male deputy head, lovely school in London, actually, absolutely gorgeous school. And what they told me is that the morning after, the male deputy head had several women knocking on his door to talk about menopause. He says, nobody has ever talked about this before. And so that's just a gate. That's just talking about it. Yeah. It is an absolute game changer. And those little things like making sure somebody can get out of their classroom in an emergency. One of the things that sometimes happens is I get head saying to me, the problem we have is that other members of staff are actually quite impatient and not very sympathetic with those people who are struggling with menopause. And actually, teachers are not mean. Most of the people I work with are nice people. So if that empathy is not happening, it's not happening for a reason. And the reason it's not happening is what's actually missing is the awareness and understanding that underpins that empathy. Because if you don't understand why somebody's having a problem, what that problem is, then that does impact on your ability to be empathetic. So again, once you've got that understanding in place, you get, much more empathy and much more support, and that that makes a massive difference to anybody who is coping with this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And that doesn't just apply to the menopause. It's like anything. If you are aware and you don't understand, and an example I would give of this is I have a relative who's suffering's the wrong word. Let me rephrase it. He's struggling a bit with ADHD, and her employer is really not aware in any great detail of what that actually means to that person. So what's been really useful is having those conversations with a manager to start with, and then the manager saying, can you take that out to the rest of the employees? Would you mind taking it out and sharing it and creating that discussion? And it's the same with menopause. You start those discussions, people start becoming more aware, people start opening up, as you've said, and you create an environment where people feel they can show empathy, they can show compassion, and they can look after each other.
Yeah. And one of the things that I get asked quite a few times actually is that I work with sort of women in menopause and perimenopause, and what they say to us, will you tell them we're not gaga?
Yeah.
We do forget things sometimes, we do get frazzled sometimes, but we can still do this. We haven't lost our marbles.
Yeah, you just need a little bit longer sometimes just
absolutely
to just go through the thinking process.
Yeah, and it's like, just back off, give us time, don't push and stress us out, just back off. But actually we can still do this.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me when I was running projects was the fact I got the brain fog. And when I got the brain fog, I felt overwhelmed. And actually the brain fog was actually happening because I was overwhelmed.
That's right.
Working it out.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. And so when I started being vulnerable to my team, they actually then supported me. And so through that, we actually found out more about each other's strengths, because like they realized that when I felt overwhelmed was when I was doing legislation, and I hated legislation, I've got to say. And so one of them took it over because they were good at it. So we started to understand each other's strengths, and that's important too.
Yeah, and one of the things they would say is sometimes what I discover with the women that I work with is they're actually trying to do too much.
Yeah.
They're trying to carry too much. And every time we let go of a bit, and every time we step back from something, somebody else steps forward.
Yeah.
And so what you're actually doing is offering somebody an opportunity.
Yes.
To shine, and so it's
Absolutely.
not always
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. I think we inhibit other people sometimes by the fact that we want to be so organized, so in control.
Yeah, and we want to be so competent, but
sometimes it's about letting go and realizing other people might not do it the way you do it, but they're still going to do it, and they're still going to show. You're probably going to learn from them. In fact, quite often the times I've let things go and let other people do it, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could do it that way.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah,
one of the things I do advise people to do when that comes over them is to buy themselves time, which is often by asking a question, or asking, can I come back to you on that? One of the things I suggest to teachers is that this is a really good time for that old question of, what did I just tell you? You have to tell them that you've forgotten.
Yeah, that's
tell me what we just discussed. So you can, if you just bang it back to somebody else, you just take the pressure off yourself for a minute, buy yourself some time, get yourself that moment to just kind of
breathe,
rest, and it will start flowing again, because it's usually only a fairly temporary blip. And what happens is, if we stress about it, we, as you say, we turn into this vicious circle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's horrendous when that happens, isn't it?
Scary. It's scary. And one of the reasons it is scary is that we're used to being so competent, and we've often come through our career with this sense that as women we've got to do extra, we've got to be extra on it and show up extra well. And so when we feel that kind of lack, we can panic.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, what do you think about thinking about that, and that showing up and feeling like you've got to do it all? I think, do you think that's because because it does feel male dominated at times, or do you think it's just simply some pressure we put on ourselves?
Both.
Bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's realizing that we've got strengths and we've got attributes that make a difference in the workplace, I suppose, and realizing that we've all got something to give.
Yeah. And other people have something to give as well. So it's okay if there's a little gap and somebody else has to fill it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very good point there.
Even in the classroom, you'll find there are things that you can make children responsible for. I mean, not really wee ones, but once they like having jobs. Not very wee ones and not very big ones, but a lot of children like having jobs and responsibilities. So if you're forgetting something all the time, you kind of have a member of the class who takes on that role to remind you of something, or to do some little, collected books or whatever it is.
Giving them the responsibility. So I'm intrigued here. I'm gonna go off tangent a little bit, Helen. But so how did you get into supporting schools with the menopause? What made you go to that direction?
I was a teacher myself.
That's what I thought. That's why because I can see the experiences coming out in what you're saying. So that's really useful to know as well.
Yeah, I was a biology teacher, so which also means I'm really good at talking about the embarrassing stuff because I taught sex education for years and years.
Yeah, that was playing quite nicely.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Can you tell us about any positive outcomes or changes you've witnessed in schools that have embraced menopause awareness and support?
I think it's where that conversation has opened. What people tell me is that there's more empathy, there's more conversation, that people are asking for help when they need it. And one of the strange things that happens is that I get leaders saying to me, "Oh yeah, of course we'll help people. They just have to come to us and we'll help them." And then we get other people in the school saying, "I can't possibly talk about this because they won't listen, they don't understand, it'll count against me in my career." And sometimes they're even in the same school. So there's this mismatch of expectations that's got to be. Once you can ally those, once they're both receiving the same message that it's okay to talk about this, and once one of the things is actually, as a leader, kind of just saying, "Well, of course they can come to me," isn't quite enough. That's got to be made absolutely clear, and it's got to be made absolutely clear that you're going to handle that conversation in a comfortable way.
Yes.
But once you heal that mismatch, then what you get is people coming together and asking for help and solving problems together.
Yeah. And then that paves the way for other discussions, and generally will build that empathy and compassion that is needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in a sense, menopause is not the beginning and end of all this. Any of these conversations that, and this work that we do as menopausal women, it actually helps everybody else, because it just makes so many other conversations easier for other people. So it makes it easier for women going through fertility treatment. If we've had the conversation about the loo, that makes it easier for men who might have issues with the prostate, for example. So it opens it up for everybody, not just for ourselves.
And that's a really important point. It's just creating that culture of openness and honesty, and at the same time, it goes, as we've discussed before, it goes back to that empathy and support. And we all need support in the workplace. We don't always need it all the time, but we need it now and then.
Absolutely. It has to be there when we need it, and that helps everybody. And especially in schools, when one of the other things we're doing is we're setting an example for young people.
Yes.
That says, we care about each other. This is what people do. This is what grown-ups do. Grown-ups care about each other and look after each other and make sure everybody's all right. That's a really important message to be sending out to young people.
Totally. It is a message that we do need to be sharing. And I think, yeah, it sounds like you're doing brilliantly. What's your vision? Your vision for your business, your vision for what you want to achieve.
My vision is that I can retire in about 5 years because everybody's got all this sorted.
Keep cracking on then.
It might take a little longer than that, but ultimately I just kind of want to work through as many schools as possible, build that awareness, make sure that their staff have all the support they need. And I'm also part of a bigger world in which, menopause care it is improving. It is improving. We're struggling with waiting lists at the moment, which is affecting a lot of people. But actually, menopause care is improving. Awareness about menopause is improving. Women's awareness about their different options through menopause is improving. So it's part of a big change in which, hopefully, in 10 years' time, this won't be so tough.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, when you're doing what you're doing with your free group and your organisations that you go into as well, that's making inroads, and that's what we need. So It's been brilliant having you on. So my last question for you is, how can leaders get in touch with you or book a chat to learn more about your expertise in helping schools support these menopause? I can't even say it.
Yeah, I do that. Always the worst to get right.
Thank you, staff. So how can they get in touch with you?
On my website is menopauseinschools.co.uk. And if you go to that, there's a form for contacting me. There's a little calendar where you can actually book a Zoom chat with me. And there's information about all the different things that I offer schools. And there's also a blog with useful articles that might help people cope with menopause and menopause at work and menopause in schools.
Excellent. Well, it's been lovely having you on. I think it's a really important topic. And I do think you're right. It does pave the way for other discussions, because it's not just one-off discussion about this. There are lots of issues that need resolving. And empathy and compassion makes all the difference in the workplace, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure having you on. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola.
Thank you for your time. Right.